and talk about a player that I had in the draft that a lot of people in Chicago was disrespecting me when I was like, I would select this quarterback, and talk about the rest of the AFC East and, of course, our Bears. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I definitely appreciate it. So listen, to pat myself on the back and break my arm, I was a Josh Allen guy, right? And I remember talking to some experts here that were raving about Baker Mayfield, and I'm like, give me the Josh Allen kid. You know what I'm saying? Like, just the cannon in the arm. So I want to ask you this. What did you initially think about the Bills drafting Josh Allen, but also looking at last year? Because, listen, I had him. I didn't think he was going to be second runner-up in the MVP race as fast or at all. Let me say that. So what do you think of his progression, and where do you think he needs to go next?
Well, first and foremost, it was a bold move by the Buffalo Bills when they ended up drafting Josh Allen. The team had made the playoffs the year before that. Tyrod Taylor was in at quarterback. It was Sean McDermott's first year as head coach. But they still knew that they needed a long-term option at quarterback. So they actually moved up twice that year in the draft. They traded away Cordy Glenn, I should say, to move up into about 12, if I remember correctly. And then from 12 to 7 to take Allen. And at that point, you already had Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold off the board. So you were wondering, who's it going to be out of those last three quarterbacks? Was it going to be Josh Allen? Was it going to be Josh Rosen? Or was it going to be Lamar Jackson? Perhaps as a little bit of a wild card there, because Jackson was moving up on a lot of the mock drafts at that time. But Allen had a lot of the intangibles that you need in Buffalo. You need that big arm, especially come November, December, January. You needed that prototypical size. He had some comparisons to Ben Roethlisberger from when Roethlisberger first had started out. I think a lot of people forget just how talented Roethlisberger was with his arms, but even a little bit in terms of maneuverability when he first came out as well. So, but there was the accuracy issues, and I understand that. I know that in a lot of cases, quarterbacks don't improve on that, but the Bills felt really comfortable with Allen, and they knew that the work that he was going to put in would help him make some strides year by year. But, to what you said, I don't know how many people thought that Allen was going to finish second in MVP voting last year. I think a lot of Bills fans are expecting that year 2 to year 3 leap, but that leap was a lot more significant than people I think were expecting.
Yeah, you see our very own Mitch Trubisky is coming to get some of that sauce, it seems like. But I want to focus on Allen before I get to Mitch. I mean, when you think about one of the last things you saw Josh Allen do in 2019 was basically get a ton of negative yards in a playoff game. All right, just like it. I mean, it got really bad real quick in the second half of that playoff game. And to just make that leap, who, outside of Josh himself, who gets most of the credit for that? The offensive coordinator or McDermott?
Actually, there's a few. I think Brian Daboll deserves his fair share of credit. I think Ken Dorsey in Buffalo, the quarterback's coach, deserves his fair share of credit as well. I think that Dorsey is the person who is kind of lying in wait for when Brian Daboll eventually gets that head coaching job. I think Dorsey will get it. And then outside of the Bills organization, Jordan Palmer deserves a ton of credit. Every offseason, Josh Allen has worked with Jordan Palmer. Palmer has put a lot of work into Allen, doing some biometrics, looking at the movement of his upper body and lower body, getting that in sync. And a lot of that obviously paid off for Allen last year. And then, of course, with Brandon Beane also acquiring Stephon Diggs, that never hurts to add a number one wide receiver to an offense where in that playoff game that you were mentioning, Duke Williams, a player who was on the practice squad last year, was their leading target in terms of passes. So that kind of tells you it's night and day between where they were to where they currently are in that wide receiver room.
Listen, of course, we're in the NFC North, so we saw a lot of Stephon Diggs, but you saw him alongside Adam Thielen. So you definitely looked at him as the number one. Some of us looked at him as number one, and Thielen is the number two. But I don't know if you looked at him as the 1-1 that he was last year. What was it like having you looked at him as just being a deep threat, but he showed last year that he can do everything. What was that like, having that type of phenomenal number one receiver to go along with your top flight quarterback?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch because, the one thing that Diggs does exceptionally well is his route running. And when you have an elite route runner, it makes the life easier for the quarterback. So with Stephon Diggs being your number one, with Cole Beasley in the slot. Again, another elite route runner. It made life a little bit easier for Josh Allen because he knew that those guys are going to get some separation. They're going to give me some a wide area for me to throw. Now, to Allen's credit, he didn't need that wide gap or that area. He was able to fit in some passes into tight windows, show off exceptional touch into some games last year. And then obviously the accuracy was off the charts. This was not wide receivers having to come back and make exceptional plays on the ball. It was Allen putting the ball right where it needed to be. So it was a little of a mix there. But from Diggs himself, just an outstanding route runner, first and foremost.
That David Show with Ryan Talbot. Follow him at Ryan Talbot Bills. I want to get to Cole Beasley, but in a roundabout way, I want to talk about Dionne Watkins and his battle with COVID-19 and him kind of talking about the fact that he had only had his second dose for 2 weeks before he got sick and having shortness of breath, chills, a fever, and being in the hospital. Like, how does that affect this team? Because here, the Sox, and I'm talking about the White Sox. I know you're on the East Coast. All right, the Sox. We have a player that you may know about. I don't know if you follow the Red Sox or not. That they trade this out. One of the players that got in the Chris Sale trade, Yoan Moncada. Yoan Moncada got affected before baseball resumed last year, and a lot of people were down on him. And one of the things I told them is he had COVID, so we don't know if something that's as unknown as COVID, how the body is going to bounce back and how each body reacts to coming back. Because you can have long haul symptoms and stuff like that. So how is Dionne Dawkins' illness going to affect this team? Because he lost 10 pounds. You're talking about your left tackle. This isn't like a receiver where you can be able to hide something because you know what route you're running. You're engaging at hike every go rip. What do you think is going to happen with Dionne Watkins as far as his health this season? Because I'm sure it's important. We just talked about Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, and you want somebody to cover Josh Allen's butt.
Well, that's the $1 million question. We need to wait and see how this affects Dionne Dawkins in the regular season. He says that he feels he can be ready for week 1 between now and then. He's kind of returned last week a little bit, and then he was actually in a lot of the 11-on-11 work yesterday, and he actually looked very good, to his credit. He looked like he was holding his own at that position, and he's been very good in that role. But you're right. We don't know how it's going to affect him long-term, how it's going to affect him on a game-by-game basis in terms of snaps that he can play. He could be winded by, at any point in that game, and they might have to put someone else in, a rookie in Spencer Brown, for instance, and give him some reps on a week-by-week basis until Dawkins feels like he can truly go 100% of the snaps, because that's what they really do need out of him. And Dawkins is not the first Bills player to see some lasting effects with COVID. Now, we don't know if he's going to have lasting effects into the season, but he was hospitalized for 4 days, shortness of breath, hot, cold. He mentioned a lot of the different side effects that he had. But last year, their third string tight end, Tommy Sweeney, had COVID, and then he was actually out for the season because it led to him having a minor heart condition. So, Sweeney's back in the mix this year for a roster spot. He was able to return to the field, but the Bills have seen firsthand how it can affect players in terms of not just short-term, but long-term.
Real quick on that, your 53-man roster is out. Everybody go check that out. What round was Spencer Brown drafted in, just to know what type of talent level people kind of predicted for him, just so we can know what round was he drafted in?
Yeah, third round.
Okay, that's not a bad tackle. You expect something from a third round tackle. Oh, okay. All right, Bills. I see what you're doing now. We don't have any tackles here, just so you know. we're going to do 7-on-7 here. We're like, everybody knows now that tackles are passe. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just so you guys can get to the new groove, because we're in a bad situation here. I don't know if you heard the Tevin Jenkins news.
Yes.
But that's Chicago. When it comes to drafting tackles early, they get hurt before they even play for the Chicago Bears. All right, speaking of playing for the Bears, you guys got someone on your team that some Chicago fans held in high regard and finally had to let go of that dream last season, and that's Mitch Trubisky. How has Mitch been in camp? I won't say attitude-wise, because Mitch never had a bad attitude. Mitch isn't a bad person. We don't want that type of narrative to be created. He did a lot of stuff in the community. But how has his play been? And have you seen him, be able to really adapt to the system, but not just adapt to the system, being able to implement it during practices and during the times in his first preseason game?
Yeah, I think he's the clear-cut number 2 quarterback, and in that first preseason game, he only attempted 2 passes. The Bills really came out with a let's get the run game going type of game plan, get Devin Singletary going, because last year they didn't really lean on the run whatsoever. It was a very pass-happy offense, and while I expect that to be the same this year, they want to have a little bit more balance there. But I also thought that the fact that he only attempted 2 passes just showed that the Bills had seen enough in practice through training camp. He's had some really strong practices. He's looked pretty good. He's come in with a positive attitude. He met with the media recently, and he said, his first goal was to find a starting job this offseason. He goes, there weren't as many opportunities as you would expect. So then after that kind of went away, the next thing was, well, what's a good situation for me? And Buffalo is a really good situation for him. First and foremost, because Brian Daboll is one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. He can learn from him this year. And not just this year. If Brian Daboll gets a head coaching job somewhere next season, who's he likely to take with him as his stopgap quarterback? Mitch Trubisky. Right. Generally speaking, when a new coach gets hired, that team needs a quarterback. It's not 100% of the time, but more times than not. So I think Trubisky's a guy that's, hey, I get a year to learn this offense, get that experience under my belt, and then, come next season, I might be this guy's starting quarterback somewhere else in the league. And that gives me a chance to start fresh somewhere else.
Hopefully it works out like that, because we don't wish the worst on Mitch. It was just Ryan Pace made a bad mistake by moving up and selecting him.